Have you ever noticed that in almost every classical painting of a saint, a king, or a deity, the right hand is raised in blessing, while the left hand is either hidden, holding an object, or passively resting? Have you ever wondered why, for nearly 2,000 years, children in schools across Europe and the Americas were physically punished for writing with their left hand? Why the word for left in Latin is literally sinister, a word that has come to mean evil, while the word for right is dexter, the root of dexterity and skill. Most people think this is just a cultural quirk, a relic of superstitious times when people didn't understand biology. They believe the preference for the right hand is simply because the majority of the population is right-handed, and society naturally drifted toward the norm. But that is not the only way to read history. In fact, if you dig into the suppressed texts of early Gnosticism, specifically the Pistis Sophia and the lost Gospels found at Nag Hammadi, a very different picture emerges. The demonization of the left hand was not an accident of culture. It was not a random evolution of etiquette. It appears to have been a deliberate, calculated engineering of human behavior designed to cut off a specific neurological and spiritual function. To understand why the left hand was made sinister, we have to define exactly what the left hand represents, not just in superstition, but in the physiological architecture of the human body. We need to start with a definition, one that bridges ancient mysticism and modern neuroscience. In the Gnostic understanding of the human vessel, the body is a receiver. It is biotechnology designed to interface with different layers of reality. And this technology is not symmetrical. In modern neurology, we know that the human brain is bicameral. It is divided into two hemispheres that function very differently. The right hand is controlled by the left hemisphere of the brain. This is the side responsible for logic, linear time, language, hierarchy, and the analysis of the material world. It is the side that dissects, categorizes, and obeys rules. It is the side that sees separation, me versus you, us versus them, human versus God. Conversely, the left hand is connected to the right hemisphere of the brain. This is the seat of intuition, holistic processing, pattern recognition, and the feeling of oceanic boundlessness. It is the side of the brain that does not perceive time as linear, but as a single present moment. It is the side that dissolves boundaries. So when we define these terms strictly, right-hand dominance is not just a physical preference. It is a neurological state of being locked into the logical, material, and separated view of reality. Left-hand activation, therefore, is the physiological trigger for accessing the intuitive, non-linear, and connected state of consciousness. The Gnostics, particularly the sects that were hunted down in the 4th century, argued that the religious institutions of their time knew this. They claimed that the suppression of the left hand was actually a suppression of the right brain, the very hardware humans use to experience direct connection with the divine without an intermediary. So how did this misunderstanding form? How did a simple biological trait become the subject of a 17th-century-long smear campaign? To understand the mechanism of this suppression, we have to look at 3 distinct historical and theological turning points. The first mechanism is the editing of the narrative. In 1945, a peasant in Egypt discovered a sealed jar containing ancient codices, now known as the Nag Hammadi Library. Among these texts were books like the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Philip. These texts presented a version of Jesus that was radically different from the one canonized by Rome. In these texts, Jesus does not ask to be worshipped. He acts as a guide, teaching his students that they possess the same spark that he does. In the Gospel of Philip, there are fragments that discuss the mystery of the arrangement, referencing specific postures used during prayer. Scholars of Gnosticism suggest that the early pneumatixa term for those seeking direct spiritual knowledge did not pray with hands clasped together. The clasping of hands, the interlacing of fingers, is a gesture of binding. It closes the circuit. It neutralizes the polarity. Instead, the texts hint at a practice where the left hand was placed over the heart center, while the right hand remained passive. This was not a gesture of submission, but a gesture of activation. By placing the left hand on the heart, the practitioner was symbolically and energetically connecting the intuitive right brain to the emotional center, bypassing the logical, critical left brain entirely. The mechanism of control, therefore, required this knowledge to be erased. When the Council of Nicaea convened in 325 AD under Emperor Constantine, the goal was not spiritual enlightenment. It was imperial unification. Constantine needed a single, unified doctrine to hold together a crumbling empire. A religion based on direct, internal, private connection to God is useless for building an empire. You cannot tax internal knowing. You cannot build a hierarchy if everyone has a direct phone line to the boss. So the texts that taught internal activation were burned. The texts that emphasized external authority were canonized, and the sinister label was applied to everything associated with the left path, the internal path. The second mechanism is the linguistic programming. This is one of the most successful psychological operations in human history. By taking the Latin word sinister, which simply meant on the left side, and attaching concepts of malice, evil, and bad luck to it, the Church Fathers created a subconscious aversion to the left side of the body. Think about the implications of this. For over 1,000 years, every time a child reached out with their left hand, they were corrected. They were told it was the wrong hand. In many cultures, the left hand was considered unclean, reserved only for hygiene, never for eating or social interaction. This goes beyond simple hygiene. It is a ritualistic shaming of half the human body. When you shame a physical action, you suppress the neurological pathway associated with it. By forcing a population to be exclusively right-hand dominant, particularly in acts of spiritual significance like making the sign of the cross or holding scripture, the system was effectively enforcing left brain dominance. They were training the population to live in the logical, hierarchical, and material world, the world where the church is the necessary bridge to the divine. They were atrophying the muscle of intuition. The third mechanism is the concept of the Archons. This is the most controversial aspect of Gnostic philosophy, but it is essential for understanding why they believed this suppression was necessary. Gnostic cosmology posits that the material universe was not created by the ultimate source of love, but by a lesser, flawed craftsman they called the Demiurge. According to texts like the Apocryphon of John, the Demiurge acts like a gatekeeper. It wants to keep the divine spark human soul strapped in the material realm, cycling through reincarnation, forgetting their true origin. The Demiurge has administrators, called Archons. These are described not as physical beings, but as forces or frequencies that govern the planetary spheres and the psychological states of humanity. The Gnostics taught that the Archons feed on specific emotional frequencies: fear, guilt, shame, and the sense of separation. When a human being feels small, sinful, and separated from God, they generate energy that sustains this system. Now, apply this to the mechanism of traditional prayer. You are on your knees. Your hands are clasped, neutralizing your own energy flow. You are looking up and out, begging an external entity for forgiveness or favor. You are affirming your smallness. You are affirming your separation. From a Gnostic perspective, this is not a connection to the source. It is a feeding ritual for the Archons. The left-hand path, or the inward turn, breaks this mechanism. When one activates the intuitive connection, the sense of separation vanishes. You realize, as the Gospel of Thomas says, the kingdom is inside of you and it is outside of you. When you realize you are part of the divine, you stop begging. You stop generating the frequency of lack. You starve the Archon. This brings us to the effect. What changes when we stop viewing the left hand as a biological accident or a sinister limb and start viewing it as a piece of dormant technology? The first effect is the collapse of the intermediary. The entire structure of organized religion, from the Vatican to the local parish, is built on the premise that you need a middleman. You need a priest to confess to. You need a building to find God in. You need a book to tell you what is true. If the left-hand activation theory is correct, then the hardware for connection is built into your own nervous system. It suggests that spiritual experience is not a moral reward for good behavior, but a biological function that has been culturally deactivated. It shifts the power dynamic from obey and receive to tune in and know. This is the ultimate heresy. It makes the institution obsolete. The second effect is a shift in cognitive processing. We live in a world that is hyperlogical, hyperlinear, and obsessed with material data. This is a world built by the left brain, the right hand. We have maximized our ability to analyze the world, but we have almost completely lost our ability to feel the world as a unified whole. Re-engaging the sinister side, the intuitive side, offers a corrective balance. It allows for what the Greeks called gnosis knowledge, that comes not from reading or studying, but from direct insight. It is the difference between reading a book about love and falling in love. One is data, the other is experience. The suppression of the left hand was a suppression of the experiential mode of being in favor of the intellectual mode. The third effect is the reclamation of the monad. In Gnosticism, the monad is the true source, the God above the God of this world. The monad is pure light, pure silence, pure unity. The Gnostics believed that the only way to contact the monad was to bypass the noise of the material world and the noise of the analytical mind. They developed techniques, often involving silence, breath, and specific body postures, to quiet the archonic noise and tune into the monadic silence. The left hand on the heart was a physical anchor for this state. It was a signal to the body, we are not doing logic right now. We are doing feeling. We are not analyzing. We are receiving. So why do people still believe the old narrative? Why, even in a modern secular world, does the word sinister still carry a chill? Why do we still instinctively clasp our hands when we want to be holy? People believe it because the programming is 17 centuries deep. It is woven into our language, our architecture, and our muscle memory. We have been taught to fear our own power. We have been conditioned to believe that anything that does not come from an external authority is dangerous or occult or crazy. The system that was established in the 4th century was designed to create a dependency. It taught us that we are broken and that the fix is external. To accept the Gnostic view that we are not broken, merely asleep, and that the awakening tool is attached to our own wrist requires a level of responsibility that creates anxiety. It is easier to be a sheep in a flock than a lion in the wilderness. But the history is there for those willing to read it. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which was also suppressed, contains passages where she speaks of the silence of the heart and the inner man. She describes vision not as something seen with the eyes, but something perceived through a faculty that lies between the spirit and the soul. This is the right brain function. This is the left-hand path. When we look at the modern world, we see a resurgence of interest in these ancient ideas. It is not because people are becoming more superstitious. It is because the materialist, logical, left-brain view of the world has reached its limit. We have mapped the entire planet, split the atom, and connected the world with fiber optics, yet we feel more isolated and anxious than ever. The Archon food of anxiety and separation is at an all-time high. The hunger people feel today is a hunger for the missing half of their own consciousness. It is a hunger for the sinister, the intuitive, the internal. The Gnostics did not just leave behind a philosophy. They left behind a map of the human trap and the human exit. They identified that the trap is built of fear and external dependency. They identified that the exit is inward. There is a concept in these texts called the restoration. It is the idea that eventually all the scattered sparks of the divine will remember who they are and return to the source, leaving the empty shell of the material world behind. This restoration happens one individual at a time. It happens when a person stops looking for God in a building and starts looking for the signal in their own silence. It is interesting to note that in recent years, science has begun to validate what these mystics claim. Studies on meditation show that deep states of prayer and contemplation reduce activity in the parietal lobes, the part of the brain that orients us in space and time and creates the sense of self versus other. When this part of the brain goes quiet, the subject experiences a sense of boundless unity. This biological state is exactly what the Gnostics were striving for, and it is exactly what the rigid hierarchical structures of imperial religion were trying to prevent. A population that feels one with the universe is very hard to control. A population that feels small and afraid is very easy to shepherd. So as we look at the clasped hands in the paintings, at the right hand of God in the scriptures, at the stigma of the left-handed child in the classroom, we are looking at the fingerprints of a massive, ancient engineering project. A project designed to close the left eye of Horus, to shut down the right hemisphere, to bind the left hand. But the biology remains. The hardware is still there. The corpus callosum still connects the two halves of the brain. The heart still beats with an electromagnetic field 5,000 times stronger than the brain's. The potential for gnosis has not been removed. It has only been discouraged. The Gnostic teachers would say that simply knowing this information is the start of the activation. To name the cage is the first step in leaving it. To understand why you were taught to suppress your intuition is the first step in unleashing it. The history of the left hand is not just a history of a limb. It is the history of human consciousness, split in two, and the long, slow war to keep it from becoming whole again. The texts were burned, the authors were exiled, and the words were twisted. But the mechanism, the human body itself, survived. And as long as the vessel remains, the potential for reconnection remains. The next time you find yourself instinctively folding your hands or looking for an answer outside of yourself, remember the history. Remember the sinister label. Remember what was hidden. The path to the monad does not lead out into the sky. It leads inward, through the silent hemisphere, guided by the hand that history tried to bind.